It's extra drama for book number 13, Kidnapped.
Ooh.
Exclamation point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, Marissa Flaxbart here again with Mischa Stanton, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Kidnapped.
Yes.
So we have so many different things that we could talk about with this book, and there's just this one little moment that I failed to mention in the main episode that I really want to bring up because it is so fucked up. Like, we gave Jessica some credit for being creative and sensitive. Like, she was a good Jessica in this book, I think, overall.
Fairly. Once she realized the gravity of her mistake, she came around really quickly and sincerely. Right.
But before that happens, before we get to the part of the book where she's remorseful, she's real Jessica. She and her friend Cara are driving to the party at the Morrows. Now, in book 12, Stephen Wakefield, Jessica and Elizabeth's brother, is on a break with his girlfriend. He doesn't know she's sick, and Jessica also doesn't know that she's sick. Nobody knows that Trisha, Stephen's girlfriend, is sick.
Gotcha.
Trisha doesn't appear in this book at all, except for off-screen. She's at home being sick, I guess. And Cara Walker, Jessica set up with Stephen and really was trying to push them together.
Right.
We learn that Trisha's sick. Jessica has to bite her tongue and not complain about how shitty her poor family is anymore. She has this moment where she's in her inner monologue. I guess I won't complain about Trisha this one time because it's so hard for Stephen. And what she doesn't say, but she must be thinking is she'll be dead soon enough and then she won't be my problem anymore.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Right? Because when Jessica and Cara are in the car, they start having this conversation about Stephen. Jessica says to Cara, "Look, it's not my fault my stupid brother can't see how good you be for him. Maybe after Trisha dies, you two could start over again."
Whoa.
And Cara says, truthfully, "Jessica, that's morbid," which is the least of what it is.
Yeah.
Morbid. "No, that's life, Cara," Jessica said matter-of-factly. "We all know she's going to die, and afterward my poor brother is going to need someone to help him pick up the pieces. It might as well be you."
That is a lot to lay on there. I see where Jessica's coming from. I see where they're coming from, but tact is also a thing.
I think that is the thing. Cara says something like, "Forget it, Jess. Nobody's going to call me a grave robber." And the whole thing, it just is, there's no way to read it. I mean, I know I write it in a very flippant voice, but I don't think there is a way to read the conversation that is not callous and it's okay to talk about these things, but we know that what Jessica has in mind for Stephen and for Cara is a lot more frivolous than what she's implying here.
Well, here's what I'll say. Without the context and only knowing books, say 12 and 13, I would be it takes what happens to Elizabeth to hook her into the empathy of feeling bad for Trisha, maybe. It takes something that happens to someone closer to her to make her realize what people would feel in that situation. But wasn't Elizabeth in some kind of other accident where she had amnesia or something?
Yeah, she was in a coma and they thought Elizabeth was going to die.
Yeah, Jessica she already had that one.
Yeah, Jessica already learned this lesson several books ago, and she even thinks about how this is very similar to the time that she didn't pick up Elizabeth from the hotel and Elizabeth got on Todd's motorcycle.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, it was a lot of fun to learn about that event just through secondhand narration of the events happening in front of me.
The deeper into these books that we get, the more that is an experience that readers and guests on the show are having where they're like, "Wait, what? Am I supposed to, what just happened?" Because it's just a quick sentence. And that's
"Oh, remember that time she lost her entire identity? Couldn't remember who she was." Right. Okay, back to the story.
Because there's virtually no trauma in Sweet Valley.
Right.
So that's all the time that these past events get.
Right.
It would have been lovely if Jessica had a moment in the book where it hit her. This is how it feels to lose a loved one.
Yeah.
And had some sympathy, not just for the Martin family, but for Trisha's sister, Betsy, who is like a notorious slut. And so that's, and a drug user. And like, that's what Jessica thinks about Betsy. And like, Trisha's father, who we've learned, and Jessica apparently knows, that he became an alcoholic after his wife died. And it's like, what if she learned... I know, right? It's a lot. What if she learned that, like, this is what it feels like to go through even the thought that maybe you're losing someone.
Yeah.
And maybe I could put myself in these people's shoes.
Empathy and sympathy, but because there's no trauma, maybe there's no growth.
I think you've hit on something there.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think you might be right. There is one more little thing that this book got me thinking that I'd love to talk about. And it is something that, as a screenwriter, I actually think about a lot, which is this question of, dang, a lot of period, like, stuff, by which I mean anything from, like, that's set in the past, even the recent past. The stories would not be possible if the characters had cell phones.
Yeah.
And that's definitely the case here, where if they would have been able to get in touch so quickly. I mean, Elizabeth's phone probably would have been lost, but like if they had seen her smashed up phone at the scene of the crime, you know, they would have...
Like if the phone was underneath the car when they found the car, they would realize that she probably didn't put it there.
Or if everybody had been trying to call Liz or text Liz for even like an hour and not gotten a response, they would have had a sense of what was wrong with her. Mm-hmm. Or like maybe they could have done like a Find My Phone thing and figured out where she was.
There never would have been the part between like, oh, I'm sure she'll make it to the party, and oh, it's 9:30, where is she? There would have been like, Todd would have texted her. Right. As soon as he got to the party, he would have been like, hey, are you here?
Well, and as soon as like Todd and Jess compared notes that like, oh, wait, Liz didn't respond to your text, your like 100 texts you sent her, Jessica, when asking her like where the hell she was when she was going to get home. And Max's calls and texts.
They could have even texted Max while he was grounded in his basement while he was studying, been like, hey, is she there with you? Exactly. Like she's supposed to be?
Yeah, they would have all figured it out very quickly that like, oh shit, Liz isn't responding to anybody's anything. Like either her battery is dead or something serious has happened.
Right.
So I was wondering if you had any times that you can think of in your past when like having a cell phone would have really helped you out. Or I guess first of all, let me ask.
Yes.
Do you remember what it was like before we all had cell phones?
Not entirely. Because before I had a cell phone, I didn't really have a need for a cell phone. I didn't have a ton of friends when I was that age. And by the time I had a cell phone, I had friends. I got a cell phone because I started visiting a friend of mine who lived like a train ride away, like along the commuter rail. And my parents were nervous about sending me on the train without a way to contact me.
Sure.
So that's why I ended up getting a cell phone for the first time. So like before I had one, I didn't need one really.
Sure, yeah.
There must have been a couple of times where it affected my life adversely. I mean, there are definitely times when like my phone is dead and I wish I could get in contact with people there.
That's whenever that happens, that's when I have this moment of like, what did we do before we had these phones? I think of this specific scenario that came up in my life a lot, which was I was meeting someone to go to the movies. Or like I was meeting friends to go see a movie. I saw a lot of movies growing up, like my whole life. I've always gone to the movies a lot. Like only as an adult did I realize how unusually often I went to the movies as a child.
And now you live in LA and I'm trying to be a screenwriter.
Yeah. So I wonder sometimes, like, how did we manage to all get there at the right time?
Yeah,
like,
we all just agreed to it, and then if someone showed up late or early, that's a time that not having a cell phone affected me personally. When I was younger, I went to Hebrew school to train for my bar mitzvah, and my parents were really bad about daylight savings, like changing over the clocks and remembering what weekend it was. So there were a couple of times where I remember being driven and dropped off at the temple, and then my parents would drive away to do everything the rest of their day, and I was there an hour early clutching my Hebrew textbooks, and like a blood drive was happening in the middle of the lobby of the temple, and I would just wander in and be like, we're supposed to have class now, right? Where's the classroom? And everyone's just like kind of woozy on their feet and eating cookies and juice. and I would just have to like sit there, and I didn't want to like study Hebrew.
They had dropped you off and like driven away.
Yeah, they were gone.
Yeah.
And like if I had a cell phone, I could have been like, hey, wait, come back, take me out for breakfast, get me a coffee, something. But like because they were gone, we didn't all have cell phones. I was just kind of stuck there.
Oh my gosh. So I was thinking about this question, and I have actually one, like the more harrowing things that happened to me as a young woman.
Oh no, tell me.
It was related to the fact that I didn't have a cell phone yet. I didn't get a cell phone until I was in college.
Okay.
And my mom actually had like an early like cell phone that looked like a little pyramid or something, but it was
Looked like a
it was like the battery was like a pyramid battery pack on the back and had like a bottom part that like flipped out.
Oh, sure.
But it was like very unreliable.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened. So my mom passed away when I was 15, and don't really remember what happened to her cell phone after that. Like, I think that maybe my dad sometimes carried it, but not that often, and the battery didn't keep a charge. It was an old thing. Mm-hmm. And so when I was about 16, and when I was a sophomore in high school, I was a passenger in a car accident. And it wasn't actually a particularly terrible car accident. We all, got out of the car. We walked free, but the car was totaled. So it looked dramatic. But we were all physically okay. It was, like 4 teenage girls. And an ambulance came, and the girls' parents were all called and or came to the scene, and basically the parents had to refuse the ambulance and say, these kids are okay. That was the situation. Problem is, my dad worked in the city and was taking a commuter train, like you were talking about commuter trains, home at the time. He was in transit from work to home.
So nowadays, fine, cell phone, no problem.
I would text him, or we would call him and be like, hey, Dad, this thing happened. Don't worry about it. I'm okay. It was a little scary, but like, I'm fine. Talk to this EMT. But instead, the EMTs were like, okay, we'll just have to call and leave a message at your house. And I was like, no, hell no. This is like, less than a year after my mother had passed away. And I was really on high alert. This is the form that my sort of grief took at that point in time, was that like I was on very high alert for my dad's emotions. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you have to let me call. And I remember walking, it happened right in front of a McDonald's. A lady was turning left to get into McDonald's in front of us. That's how this accident happened. So I went into the McDonald's, like in the back, and I like begged them, like, you have to let me make the call. Because if he needs to hear from me and not from some random stranger when he listens to the voicemail.
Yeah.
In our answering machine at home, to hear me say, I'm okay. I was in a car accident. I'm okay. Come to the hospital. But even then, then I'm on the ambulance, I'm like on a stretcher, and then not knowing when my dad's going to show up, and if we'd been able to get a hold of him, it would have saved me all of that grief.
Yeah.
I think I was more like in pain and like beaten up from the ambulance ride than from the accident.
Ambulances can be rough. I've ridden in some ambulances that took hard corners.
Yeah.
For sure.
And one of the most traumatic elements of that experience was that I really had to pee so bad.
Oh, no.
And they wouldn't let me stand up. And they were like, we can bring you a bedpan. And I was like, no, I don't want it. I'm 16. No. I don't want to use a bedpan. And then ultimately I had to go so bad that I started to cry. And somebody saw me and were like, oh, no, are you okay? Are you in pain? And I was like, I'm fine. I just have to pee. And then they let me get up because it was all just stupid, like, red tape.
A happy ending after all.
Yes. And I was fine.
Good. I'm glad. All of that would have been mitigated with cell phones.
So everybody just take a moment of gratitude for the era that we live in.
How lucky we are to be alive right now.
Yeah, I know the cell phones, there are lots to complain about with our cell phone society, but being able to communicate quickly is usually a blessing.
One of my designer idols often says, your greatest weakness is your greatest strength taken too far. And so if cell phones are destroying our culture, it's only because they're rad.
It's perfect. It's the corruption of our superpower. Mm-hmm. It's our Dark Phoenix.
Your fatal flaw. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Mischa, thank you so much for going down memory lane with me.
Of course. Happy to do it.
All right. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Extra Drama. Please subscribe, rate, review the podcast on iTunes especially. I would love to be able to share this show with more of you beautiful people out in the world. Right? That's a good idea, right, Mischa?
That sounds great. More people reading this roller coaster of a series.
Take it from the professional podcast producer.
Wink.
Rating and describing is a good idea.
Yeah, it's the best way for new listeners to find the show for some mystical, magical reason that is beyond the ken of mortal folk. Leaving 5-star ratings helps podcasts. It's crazy. It's wild.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Praise, amaze. Thanks. Bye. See you next week.
Okay.
Let me actually start a timer so that I can pay attention to what I'm doing.
How long should this be?
I don't know. 10 minutes.
All right.
Max.
Cool. Easy.